Can I work in a restaurant where they serve alcohol and pork? Our Sharia does not allow us to carry alcohol, transport alcohol, sell alcohol, serve alcohol. We really have to get out of those jobs unless there's no alternative and you're literally going to be on the street unless you have this job. In which case we say temporarily do it, but try your best to get out and find another job. Otherwise, it is not allowed to serve alcohol or sell alcohol or be involved with alcohol. As for pork, suppose a restaurant has pork but not alcohol, it is still haram, but the level of prohibition is much less than that of alcohol. So the same thing applies. We will say try to find an alternative job, but the level of prohibition is less, so there's a little bit more leeway in that regard, and it's not as dire. So perhaps if life becomes difficult but not impossible, we will say in this case you may work in this restaurant for a period of time that has pork but not alcohol, but you still have to intend to find a restaurant or to find an alternative means of income, because essentially it is not allowed to be involved in najis or in what we would consider filth and giving it to other people, but the prohibition of alcohol is much worse than that of pork, and that's really the point that I'm trying to convey here. When should I make up the fast, and when do I have to pay the fidya or kafara? If you have a legitimate excuse that caused you to miss a few days of Ramadan, you should make up the fast as soon as possible, preferably before the next Ramadan. As for paying fidya and kafara, if you are not fasting for a legitimate reason and you're not going to make up the fast, so for example you're elderly or you're sick, you should pay the fidya or the kafara on that very day, or you can prepay, or you can pay at the end of the month all at once, but it should be done during that month as soon as possible, and preferably, ideally, every day you pay one person the way it should be done, but it is allowed to pay a lump sum. So you take all of the 30 days and then you give to the poor at the beginning or at the end of the month. For the sisters who are in their monthly cycle and they're not fasting, can they read the Quran? And if so, how should they read the Quran? The sisters who are in their menses, obviously they're not going to fast during that time frame. However, they may still engage in other actions of worship. Definitely they may do dhikr, they may make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they may study Islamic literature. The issue of reciting the Quran is one that there is a bit of a diversity of opinion over. Many of the scholars say that a woman in her menses should not recite the Quran. Most of the scholars say that she should not touch the Quran. She should not physically touch the Quran. Perhaps a middle ground can be that she doesn't touch the Mus'haf, but she may touch something that gives her the Quranic message, for example, a tablet or an iPad or something of this nature, and she may recite in her head internally, so she may recite without actually verbalizing, and if she does this, insha'Allah ta'ala, she will have gotten out of the controversy of the issue of reciting the Quran in the menses or not, and this is the best way forward. But for sure, our sisters during that time frame should engage in other actions of worship, such as learning about Islam, such as making dua, such as making dhikr, and much can be done even in these days. The goal is to come closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in whatever way possible. My imam holds the Mus'haf while he's praying. Is that okay? Sure, it is narrated in Sahih Bukhari that one of the servants of Aisha had not memorized the Quran, and so he would hold the Mus'haf in Taraweeh and recite the Quran from there. Taraweeh is not fard, prayer. So the rules are a bit lax. So if the imam wishes to hold the Mus'haf and he wants to do that, it will not invalidate the salah, it will not diminish the rewards of the salah, and it is permissible to do. No doubt it is better to recite from memory as the way that the Muslims do, but there's no sin, there's no haraj, there's no harm if the imam holds the Mus'haf, and you may hold the Mus'haf as well in your private Taraweeh prayer. What should I do if my family and friends begin or end Ramadan on a date different than I am? My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, our Prophet ﷺ encouraged unity of the Muslims, and he said Allah's hand is over the jama'ah, over the group, and especially when it comes to Ramadan. Our Prophet ﷺ said that Ramadan is the day when you all begin to fast, and the Eid al-Fitr is the day when you all stop to fast. So more important than the methodology that you use, whether it is moon sighting, whether it is global, whether it is this, whether it is that, the unity of of the community is more important than any of these principles of fiqh. So, if you are living in a land of Islam and the government or the mufti or the official administration announces that the whole country should fast on this day and stop its fast on this day, then you will follow the people of the land, because Allah's mercy comes with unity. And if you're living in lands that are not governed by Islam, and so every community is following itself, then you follow the majority and you follow your locality and your masjid. You follow the people that you associate with and try your best to achieve some type of majority within at least your city or at least your community. So the point is that you yourself should not break away from your family and friends. Try your best to stick together and celebrate Ramadan as a whole, and realize that these are not issues where we should be divided over. Even if one masjid begins on one day and the other masjid begins on another, this is a difference in fiqh that is permissible, and Allah Azza wa Jalla will not punish either of these two groups, even if unity could not be achieved. So stick with the jama'ah, stick with the group of people, stick with your family and friends, and try to form a unified position amongst yourselves. That is what is going to be best in this scenario. Can I break my fast if I have a headache or migraine? The general rule is that the fast can only be broken for a very severe emergency. So you have to judge best. The average headache or the average minor irritation or nuisance must be borne with. However, if it is so severe that life becomes extremely difficult, that you are scared you're going to faint or you're not going to be able to make it to the end of the day, at this point in time, and you know best what is your threshold limit, people are different, at that point in time, if it's a very severe, overpowering migraine and you feel that you're not going to be able to last without severe problems and repercussions, you are allowed to break the fast and then make it up afterwards. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah does not place a burden on a person more than what he or she can bear. If you really cannot bear it and it is unbearable and only you know what is unbearable, then you are allowed to break the fast and then make it up a day after Ramadan. Our Imam is a child. Can we pray Taraweeh behind him? In a hadith in Sahih Bukhari, we learned that a community found a 7-year-old in their midst who knew more Quran than they all did. And so they made him their Imam. The 7-year-old was made their Imam and they all prayed behind him. And so there's no problem with a young child being the Imam as long as some conditions are met. Of them is that the child is aware that he has to have wudu and not break the wudu, and leads the prayer in a good manner. So if the best person that your community has is a young boy who has memorized the Quran and his tajweed and recitation is the best, then there's no problem. As well, if you find a young man, maybe 10, 12 years old, just to encourage this boy to learn more, or you want to show that we have somebody who's doing the Quran and he does 2 rak'ah maybe, and just as an encouragement, this is all permitted. It is not a necessary requirement that the Imam be perfect in tajweed, but the goal is that the best person is chosen. And if occasionally somebody who's not necessarily the best is chosen for another reason, it is permitted as long as the Imam understands what it means to be an Imam. And so yes, it is permitted for a young boy to be the Imam, especially when he is the most qualified to do so. Can I use toothpaste and mouthwash when I'm fasting? The simple answer is, well, yes, but. Meaning, fasting will be broken if something goes into the throat, under the throat. So everything above the throat, everything in your mouth will not technically break the fast. However, you are quite literally 1 millimeter away from breaking the fast. So when you put something external into your mouth, right, it's very difficult, it's not impossible, it's very difficult to guarantee that nothing goes down into your throat. So I would strongly encourage you to try alternative methods, such as the miswak that our Prophet ﷺ would use. The miswak, there's no danger of anything going in because it's just a brush. Or if you use a toothbrush without toothpaste, that will also not have any problem. However, if you do use toothpaste, then you have to be extra careful and conscious that nothing goes under and into your throat, and that you spit everything out and you wash your mouth very, very thoroughly so that none of the toothpaste will then go inside of your throat, because that will break the fast. So be very, very careful and try alternative means. But if you are careful and you make sure nothing is swallowed, then the fast will be valid. Does kissing my spouse break my fast? short answer is absolutely not. Our Prophet ﷺ, Aisha narrates that the Prophet ﷺ would kiss me while he is fasting. So it is authentically narrated that this is something that does not break the fast. However, our scholars say that if a person is young and newly married and they're worried that the kiss might lead to more than this, then they should avoid this, because obviously what is forbidden and what breaks the fast is intimacy. Kissing does not break the fast, but what if kissing leads to intimacy? What if a person is overcome with desire? So a person knows himself and herself, and that's why one should judge. In and of itself, kissing does not break the fast, and it is allowed to kiss. However, if you feel that it's going to lead to more than this, it should be avoided, because Allah SWT does not want us to come even close to committing a sin. And be very careful, because the penalty for breaking your fast in Ramadan is to feed 60 people, or to fast 60 days. And if you can't do that, then to feed 60 people. So therefore, try your best to avoid it if you feel it's going to lead to more than that. I spend all day on Xbox and PS4 and blockbuster movies in Ramadan. What should I do? My dear brothers and sisters in Islam, the month of Ramadan is the month where we demonstrate to Allah our righteousness, our pious side. Now, no doubt, Xbox and these types of things, they might be permissible, but they're not the best way to spend the days of Ramadan. The days of Ramadan are meant to be days of worship and ibadah. They're meant to demonstrate your piety and your taqwa. And it is mentioned, there are scholars of the past, when Ramadan would come, they would shut off everything. In fact, sometimes businessmen would lock their businesses and just spend their entire days and nights with family and with Ramadan and in the masjids. So I understand that it's difficult to cut away 100%. Try your best, and if you cannot, then for sure minimize and make sure that you are spending a healthy amount of time with the Quran. As long as you're showing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you're way above average, you're doing what you don't do outside of the month, make sure that you prioritize the religion and prioritize the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you know, if it gets boring for you to do rituals all the time, why don't you find something that is permissible and there's not going to be any sin in it? So the problem with movies obviously is that there's going to be things that are in there that are not appropriate, and that just goes against the purpose of Ramadan. Spend family time, spend time with your siblings, with your family. That's halal, that's permissible. Speak with them, do things that will have no sin and in fact can become actions of worship that will be better for you. Be productive in Ramadan and establish a habit of virtue and of piety, and work your way higher and higher. And if you fall into something of this nature, just ask Allah for forgiveness and do a little bit of extra Quran, so that you show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala you're trying your best.